My spouse and I met in our first year of college around 14 years ago. We spent a few weeks as acquaintances in a large group of friends and didn't really get to meet one another well until this event. For a little bit of backstory, our group of friends loved to take walks in the woods. Our campus was surrounded by a forest. Unfortunately, everyone had class or work during the day, so we often waited till night when everyone was free to go on our walks. We were so comfortable in the woods at night, it just felt like a perfectly natural thing to do. This particular night, which happened to be the night before Halloween, a bunch of our friends were dropping out for one reason or the other. Their homework or tired or tests, whatever. Eventually, the last one beside my future husband and I dropped out. But knowing that we didn't know each other that well, one of the last friends of our group told us we should just go on the walk anyways. It was a little awkward, but we were both friendly people, so we decided to be adventurous and make the best of it. So we headed out into the woods, just acquaintances, and decided to walk down the path that would take us to a place called the altar site. It's called this because it has a log-shaped like altar, where a lot of college students often left knickknacks and things. Unfortunately, in the dark, we didn't know this path that well, and we realized that we were quickly getting lost. We joked about having to spend the night out there, and I said, "I hope you aren't afraid of survival cuddling." After 45 minutes of walking in what seemed like circles, we started to realize that this actually might not be a joke. We then decided we should just pick a line and start walking as straight as we could through the woods. We were hoping this would get us out to the road, because we knew that entire section of woods was surrounded by roads or ocean, and we would know what to do once we hit one or the other. It was pretty rough. We walked through the trees and rivers and swamps, just kept going for an hour or so until we stumbled on what seemed to be a larger trail than what we had been on. At this point, we just started following that trail, hoping it was a main trail we could use to find our way out. I was so thrilled. I remember jumping out onto it, smiling and saying, "We're gonna be okay. This will surely get us out." We followed it out into a small meadow, where we unfortunately lost sight of the trail again, hoping that we would see it again through the woods on the other side. We walked across the meadow and entered the tree line on the other side, only to realize that that trail had disappeared. We were about to turn around when we suddenly heard a loud and crisp bloody scream in the woods nearby. It must have lasted like 10 seconds and it felt super close. I can only describe the sound as like a pig bird woman screaming bloody murder. We stood there for a second and then I asked, "What was that?" F said, I don't know. Then suggested we head back to the meadow where we could kind of see things. So that's what we did. We headed back and just stood there for a few minutes, not sure what to do next. We could not find that trail, and something screamed in the woods. It was a dreadful feeling knowing we weren't alone, and had no idea how to get away from it. I then heard a thick branch on the ground in the tree line snap, and a thick bushy tree near it started to shake like something in it moved. Right after that, there was another scream again. Whatever it was, it definitely was right under that tree near us. The scream lasted for what it felt like 15 seconds, definitely longer than the first one, and I remember suddenly hugging this acquaintance I was walking with out of fear. It was kind of awkward. I remember apologizing right afterwards. He told me years later that if he hadn't been scared out of his wits, that a hug would have been a lot more enjoyable, and it was kind of nice having this girl latch onto him like her life depended on it. I thought it was the last hug I was ever going to get. At this point, we were on a loss of what to do, and I remember turning and looking behind us and making out what looked like to be a trail curving around a bend. I guess somehow we missed it, because we had walked into the meadow thinking it was the trail. I pointed it out to him, and we got back to back and started heading up the new trail path. We had brought our crappy flip phones with us, hoping to use them as flashlights. The brighter one had died earlier on the trail, but mine was still working. Unfortunately, I really couldn't see much with it. I just started flipping it open and shut, hoping it might scare whatever it is out there. When we got about 20 paces up the trail, I started to hear a pattern of noise behind us. Since it was fall, the trail had leaves on it. But since it got walked on a lot during the day, The leaves in the center of the trail were flattened, but the leaves on the side were still crunchy. I kept hearing leaves on one side get stepped on, then silence. Then the leaves on the other side of the trail crunching. It sounded like something was moving from side to side behind us on the trail, trying to get around my sight of vision. That's when we heard it scream one more time. It was right behind us. We both started running. It was only about 20 more paces, and suddenly, we were out of the woods and in a large meadow that we both realized that we recognized. We ran to the other side of the meadow, got to the paved road right near campus, but we did hear that thing scream one more time from the tree line. We ran back to our dorm rooms, promising to talk about whatever the hell it was in the morning. It was so late at night at this point, but we both were pumped with adrenaline from shared terror. I tried looking it up, what it was that night, with my headphones on in the dark room, while my roommate slept. I had some woodland experience, and I wanted it to be the sound of a screeching owl. I looked at all the screeching birds in the region, but nothing was quite right. They all sounded very screechy and bird-like, but the edge of the human-like vocals just wasn't in anything I found. So I went to bed. We told our friends about it in the morning, and it became an instant campus urban legend, people calling it the Banshee in the Woods. Some people wanted to make it into a documentary project, but it just stayed a local legend for a couple of years before fading away with all the other noise of the campus life. Most of our friends had heard the story by that point, so I was surprised when a friend of ours couldn't recall it. We told him the story and described the sounds in the best we could. He said, "I know exactly what you heard. That's a cougar." Well, shit. I looked that up. No idea why I hadn't thought of it before. I knew cats could scream like women, but I'd never heard it before despite my woodland experience. Funny enough, I did know from some of my tracker friends that cougars often follow 5 to 6 month long territory walks. So I started keeping an ear out for cougar sightings and activity around the campus. Sure enough, I was able to track down people who had seen the cat about a half a year after our encounter, with no sightings in between, and some articles about sightings around a year after our incident. I found some people who had found a kill site on campus around 6 months after that. We could track the cat's routine visits to the campus to line up very squarely with ours. We only lasted a couple more weeks as acquaintance friends. I don't know if it was the experience in the woods or if it was just us, but we both desired more than friendship. It wasn't a clean transition. He had just come out of a relationship a few weeks before we'd met, and was terrified that he was rebounding. We both took the winter slow and examined our thoughts. When we came back after the winter's New Year, there was no doubt. It's been over 14 years now. A few years ago at our wedding, we told the story to our whole reception, and surprisingly still had friends and family that hadn't heard it. We were both freelance and spend most of our day with each other working creatively. We walked in those woods practically strangers, and it sparked something that I never thought I would find. It wasn't scar-free though. Trauma brought us together, but it also had its cost on my mental well-being. I started noticing it just a couple of months after the event. And sometimes I was having panic attacks in the woods at night. Just the slightest noise I didn't recognize, I'd be filled with dread, almost paralyzed and begging those around me to get me the hell out of the forest. For me, that's been a big cost. I grew up walking in the woods at night. I'd become so comfortable with it. To lose that as an adult felt a little humiliating. I like to think I have made progress over the last 14 years in pushing it back. But all it takes is the right conditions to bring it back as well. So that's how my husband and I got to know one another.
Honestly, skinwalkers scare me more than anything. Like I can't breathe. I'm frozen scared, tears rolling down my face. Backstory. I was homeless 2 years ago and living with 2 other homeless teens. As far as being homeless went, we were well off. We had each other and previous survival skills as we came from horrible homes. We befriended another homeless group and they showed us their ragtag camp, which, in a way, was kinda magical. It was in the woods, and actually had an actual bed carved from a tree and a tarp as shelter, with battery-powered fairy lights inside. My late grandpa was Native American, and that was kind of what got me into urban legends around Native history and such. Anyways, the homeless group we befriended took pity on us and lent us the campsite for a few weeks, and we were able to get work setting up things the way we wanted them. We had 2 dogs, Pepper, who was severely abused and actually liked homelessness, and Autumn, who was a demon in dog form, who was also abused. Pepper was overly sensitive, cautious, and scared of her own shadow, and Autumn was the complete opposite. We set them under the tarp and a makeshift bed right above our heads, and for a few nights everything was okay. Then, it changed. We didn't feel safe there. We were up late telling stories, and I mentioned the skinwalkers, and how talking about them attracted them. Halfway into the stories, our dogs go insane. I'd never seen the type of raw fear from either one of the dogs. Pepper was almost unrecognizable. She was so afraid but ready to protect us. We were horrified at first, frozen with anxiety and fear, but it wore down as soon as we realized how silly we were being. And then, we heard it. Not quite a human and not quite an animal. Nothing will ever scare me as much to this day. I have a bad heart condition, and this scare almost killed me. We couldn't move. It was walking around the camp, and the only thing protecting us was a cheap plastic tarp and some duct tape. I don't remember much from that night, only woke up to see the guys were still awake. Part of the camp was destroyed. We were too afraid to sleep there again, so it became a storage place. All but one of us made it out of homelessness.
This story took place when I was in the 5th grade. It was the first year that my parents felt comfortable not walking alongside us while my friends and I would go trick-or-treating. I was made fun of at school for this very reason for a short period. My friends had all been able to go it alone for the last 2 years. Halloween fell on a Saturday that year. That gave my friends and I plenty of time to figure out what subdivisions we wanted to visit. We knew of a few very good homes around us, but we decided to change it up this year, since my parents wouldn't be dictating where we could and could not go. There are 3 separate subdivisions that surround where we lived. 2 of them were smaller, but had bigger homes. We figured they would be giving out good candy as the houses were further apart. The 3rd subdivision is in an area that none of us were very familiar with. It was pretty large, but many of the homes looked like they were either abandoned or at least should be torn down. The nice thing about the more run-down subdivision were that the homes were much closer to each other. We figured we could go door to door and pick up much more candy. We hit up the 2 larger subdivisions first, then went home to drop off our candy and go to the other part of town with empty pillowcases. By this time, it was around 8:30 in the evening. Some of the houses had already run out of candy, but we kept moving along. After all, it was a Saturday, and we had nothing to do the next day other than to stuff our faces. By about 9:45, almost all houses were not even answering their door. I would guess maybe 1 in 10 homes still had their decorations out and lights on. We started to wander back into the direction of my home, still stopping at any house with their lights on. We hadn't passed another trick-or-treater in about half an hour by this point in the evening. It seemed like we were the only ones out on the street. The few homes that were still giving out candy would leave the bowls in their front porch. We ended up taking quite a bit from those. There was a large vacant field that separated the edge of this subdivision to ours. I think at one point they planned on connecting the 2, but it's 9 years later and they still haven't. One of the last houses on the street looked like it hadn't been occupied in years. Most of the windows were boarded up. However, we didn't know if that was real or part of the Halloween decor. The house didn't have any lights on from the few windows that were not covered with wood. However, the front door was cracked open slightly. There was also maybe 5 or 6 torches and candles lined up down the driveway and then onto the front porch. They gave off just enough light to see the walkway and illuminated the porch to see a candy bowl on the ground visible. When we approached the house, we started to realize that someone was standing in the partially open doorway. It looked to be a very slim and older woman, maybe in her 50s or 60s. She had a big smile on her face as we approached the house. She just seemed excited to see us in our costumes and out enjoying the night. As we stood out on the front porch, we all said trick or treat as we held out our rather heavy pillowcases. She just looked at us. She didn't respond or say anything. One of my friends just repeated himself. The rest of us stayed silent. She glared at my friend with this blank stare. She eventually looked down at the empty bowl sitting on the ground in front of her. She then smiled and looked back at my friend, saying that she would need to go inside to get more candy. She turned around and disappeared into the pitch black house. Then we could hear a faint voice saying, "Why don't you come in and get it? You can take as much as you want." For some reason, we forgot about her creepy demeanor so far, and were about to enter the house. She then said, "No, just him." My other friends and I waited outside, as my one friend shrugged his shoulders, and then walked into the black abyss. We were becoming increasingly more impatient waiting outside, when all of a sudden he emerged from the house and yelled for us to run. We didn't know what we were running from, but we ran through the field and ended up at my house completely out of breath. We were all sitting on my front lawn, trying to comprehend what had just happened. My friend finally composed himself enough to explain. Apparently, he walked inside the house and the woman kept calling him. This was before many people had cell phones, so he didn't have a flashlight on there to help guide him through. He ended up using his watch, which gave off very limited lighting, only enough to help him not walk into walls or trip over anything. He asked where the woman went. She never responded. He was about to turn around and leave when he noticed the shadow of the woman walking near the kitchen. She never looked at him. She just walked into another room with an emotionless face. He walked a few more steps in her direction when he realized that she was descending some stairs into the basement. He shined his watch around at the top of the stairs to see if he could see anyone. This is when he heard laughing, but it sounded like it was coming from numerous people. This was then followed by a pounding of someone running up the stairs towards him. We immediately told our parents the story, who later called the police. A short while later, the police returned to my house, where they informed us that they didn't find anyone or anything. No torches or candles on the porch. No woman. Apparently this house had been abandoned for years.
Halloween Strangers from Mr. Evil Guy. It was my turn to take my kids trick-or-treating. The previous year was my wife's, and we trade back and forth every year. My son and daughter are aged 7 and 9. Usually I stay on the street while my kids go up to the different houses to collect candy. After about half an hour of walking around, we came to one of the more popular hotspots for candy collecting. A main street in the neighborhood, lots of really cool decorations and animatronics on people's lawns. So I became a bit distracted and stopped watching my kids closely. At one point, they came back from a house accompanied by another girl about the same height as my daughter. She was wearing a weird homemade mask, like a cardboard cutout or something. My daughter asked me if she could trick-or-treat with us, so I said sure, and we carried on together as a group. I didn't know who this girl was, but I figured she was a friend from school. As we continued, I started to notice a large man trailing us. He was wearing some sort of angry cat mask. It was kind of creepy, to be honest. I thought that maybe he was the father of the girl, so I tried to start up some small chat with him. I said something like, "Nice weather, huh?" But he didn't respond. He just stood there, staring at me, while our kids went up the stairs to the next house. I tried again, asking, "Hey, is that your daughter?" He nodded, but didn't say anything. I figured he just wasn't in the mood for chatting, so I stopped trying. We carried on for about another 15 minutes, until suddenly my kids came up to me and said they wanted to go home. This surprised me as we hadn't been out for too long, and their bags were only about a third full. In any case, I agreed, waved goodbye at the man in the cat mask and his daughter, and started on our way home. The weird thing is that when I glanced back, the man and his daughter were just standing there, staring at us. I checked one more time as we turned the corner, and they were still standing there, not having moved at all. At this point, I decided to ask my kids, "So, who was that girl?" My daughter looked up at me with a confused look on her face. "She's your friend," my daughter replied. I asked her what she meant. Apparently, the girl with the cardboard mask approached them and said she was a friend of mine. She told my daughter she was too shy to ask me if she could join us to trick or treat, and wanted my daughter to ask me instead. I laughed at this story and replied to my daughter, "Why would you think she was my friend? I don't have any children friends." What my daughter said next chilled my bones. According to her, when the girl with the cardboard mask approached them for the first time, she wasn't wearing the mask, so they were able to see her face. As it turns out, she wasn't a girl at all, but an older woman around my age with wrinkles on her face. What's even more disturbing, the old woman had started to steal treats from my daughter's bag, apparently when I wasn't looking. This is why they asked me to go home. The old woman was creeping them out, and they wanted to just get away from her. I brought my kids home and told my wife what happened. We made sure to check through all their candy, but didn't find anything suspicious or off. We didn't call the police or anything since nothing really happened, but thinking back, I kind of regret that decision now. What the heck was the old woman doing, and who the hell was that man following us around? I don't think I'll ever know. I just think it's sick that there are people out there on Halloween hiding behind masks, pretending to be children.
About 15 years ago, when I was 22-ish, my best girl and I went out to bars 3 to 4 plus nights a week, and generally met some interesting people and made new friends. There were a few bars that we hit up more than others, and one in particular where we knew the bartender and manager pretty well. We went the week of Halloween, and each night their staff would dress up in a different costume. This is where we came across Ron. He was bouncing at this bar. He didn't even catch my eye in the slightest, as I gave him my ID to get in. Until a few years ago, I never looked anyone in the face. I have to force myself to do it. My girl and I hung out, drank and danced, met some people, then headed up to the bar to chat with our friend. He asked me what I thought about Ron. I had no idea who he meant, and he gestured to the bouncer, to which I was like, meh. He was older looking, very muscular, turned out to be a major gym rat, and I was 22-ish, dressed in black and skulls and platforms. Didn't seem my type on the outside, but the bartender friend vouched for him, said he was a really cool guy. He asked if he could give Ron my number, and I figured it would be okay. I hear from him the next day, and he wants to hang. At the time, I lived with my uncle and aunt, a pastor and his wife, so he invited me to meet at his place, and we would just go have a casual hang somewhere. Simple middle-of-the-day chill. I get there and his apartment door is wide open, and his much better looking, married and closer to my age best friend is there. He seems nice enough, and I didn't feel unsafe as they left the door wide open, and again, my bartender friend had vouched for him. He mentions he needs to grab a few office supplies, so the three of us pile into his douchey car and head to an office supply store. We go in, and as we walk in, a pretty girl walks by, and he does the head thing and completely stares at her, like the obvious follow her with his head thing. We aren't together, but I found it to be rude. So later in the car I mention it. I tell him, hey look, I know we're just hanging out, but don't disrespect me like that. Everyone looks, but be less obvious and don't make me look like an ass in public. He laughs and tells me that it's hot that I stood up for myself, especially on our first hangout. Okay, we get back to his place, and as we walk inside he says,
I like that. You're gonna have a ring on your finger by December.
remember, we met Halloween week. So anyway, his friend leaves and we get takeout and hang and drink and just talk. Turns out he is from the same tiny town as that my parents are from, which is 6 hours south of us. He is a Desert Storm veteran, which made him more than 20 years older than me, and was back in school to finish his degree, worked full-time during the week, and bounced at night on the weekends. Seemed decent. He asked about my tattoos. I have a lot. And we talked about my love of horror and fascination with true crime and serial killers. He seems interested, but says he doesn't know much about them. So I tell him I'll lend him my encyclopedia of serial killers, so it can be like a crash course for him. Maybe a week later we hang out again, and I bring him the book. We hang multiple times. I even sleep there a few times. One day, we are hanging out and day drinking heavily. He says something to me that felt very much like he was getting way too comfortable too fast. Like telling me to do something. I told him not to speak to me that way, and turned to walk away when my head jerked back. He grabbed my hair at the base of my neck. I grabbed his hand and he tried to laugh it off and apologize, saying he didn't mean to be that rough, and tried to act like it was some sort of foreplay. But I cut that off real quick. I wanted to leave, but I was already very buzzed. So I just sat, and he said he was going to do some work. I thought I would just let the buzz wear off, head home and never talk to this guy again. While I'm sitting and he's working, he suddenly decides to tell me in graphic detail about his favorite serial killer in the book so far, and why. I think the way he is talking about it seems off, but again, I'm just waiting out my buzz. He starts working on a sociology assignment that is studying urban legends and such. He plays videos with horrible, creepy content and is creeping me out. I realized later that I felt that way because I didn't feel safe with him. I ask him to wait until I'm gone to play it out loud, or put on headphones, and he laughs at me. Tells me he can't believe I'm such a poser. Tells me,
You have all these tattoos and skulls, and really, you're scared. You look all goth or punk rock, but you're terrified.
he laughs this scary laugh. He is really enjoying that this creeps me out. I don't want to drive, even mildly buzzed. I tell him that his reaction is really scaring me. I love scary things, but I realize this guy is enjoying watching me squirm in a really sick way, and he loves it. I tell him that his reaction is really scaring me, and he loves it. His face gets completely serious, and he suddenly tells me that he has his machete under his mattress. I look and see the handle barely sticking out. He tells me he could make me disappear and nobody would ever find my body. In that moment, my adrenaline hit. I grabbed my bag and ran to my car. He sort of slowly lumbered behind me, laughing at me and telling me not to leave. I am stone cold sober at this point. Adrenaline, I guess. And start my car. Take off about 2 minutes down the road by the mall and just park and slow my breathing down. I call my girl and just unload. For the next week, he texts and calls me over and over, switching between begging me to give him another chance and berating me, calling me a poser and a fake. I tell our bartender friend and he can't believe that Ron did all of those things. He only works with him a few more times and they don't talk. Ron set his sights on someone new, another chick in her early 20s. Her family owns the Vietnamese restaurant in the same strip as the bar. Bartender tells us Ron had just started seeing her, and she ended up pregnant immediately. I asked bartender to warn her or give her my number, but he never saw her again. I hope and pray that she didn't get stuck with Ron, and every time I'm in the area I pray that I don't run into him again. He can keep the encyclopedia. I just hope he hasn't picked up any tips from it.
Last year in October, my friend and I went to the Winchester House in San Jose for a night flashlight tour. Since it was during the Halloween season, they were playing a lot of very obviously fake background noises, such as footsteps on the top floor, or voices of kids, etc. So my friend and I, who's a skeptic, were like, "Oh, how spooky," sarcastically, and we really didn't expect to experience anything. But as soon as we got halfway through the tour of the house, around the second floor, we started noticing that the temperature in certain areas or rooms would drastically change, even though we didn't notice any fans nearby. We still didn't think much of it at this point, and we're just casually looking with our flashlights into the rooms. I should mention that for this tour, all the lights were completely off, so everyone just has their flashlights on, pointing wherever they want to see. Now, here's where it gets creepy. At some point, we're in this room with a lot of glass doors and windows looking into exhibition rooms. The rooms were either closed off or locked. There's no one inside there, not even the workers. I was looking straight into this one room that had glass windows surrounding it. I was pointing my flashlight straight, looking around the room. I turned to the left, to this one small corner that was surrounded by glass, and I'm like a foot away from it when I notice a dark shadow right behind the glass. The more I stare at it, the more I realize it's like a shadowy face. It was like I was in a trance. I was frozen in place, and through the other side of the glass, this old, wrinkly face of a woman was staring back at me. She looked like she was wearing a sheer black cloth over her head. I could see wrinkles on her face, and her eyes were just dark and piercing. It was like we were just staring deeply at each other. I can't explain it very well, but it wasn't solid like a regular person. It was dark and almost like a shadow, except a lot more clear. I also only noticed a face, not a body. A few seconds later, I snap out of it, and I scream my friend's name and run towards her. When I told her what happened, we both went back to the place where I saw the face, and we looked around the room to see if there were any workers there, if there were any projectors around. But the room was empty. And if you've ever been to that house, you know a lot of these random corners and spaces in certain rooms are barely big enough to fit a human. I was shaking so much after that, and my anxiety was getting pretty bad. I just knew what I saw. I knew there was no way it was just my mind playing tricks on me. As we continued the tour, I started looking at the pictures of the house and the people back then. And the more you look at these pictures, you notice super creepy and demonic faces within them that just completely gave me the creeps. Maybe I was just tripping about these photos. I don't know. After that, I started taking pictures with the flash to see if I could catch anything. And my pictures were mostly coming out blurry, but I did catch this one picture that I edited, and it literally looked like the shape of a woman in a dress. I also got a live photo that shows an orb moving across the camera. I'll try to attach those photos. When I showed my boyfriend the pictures the next day, he, being a huge skeptic, said it was probably just dust or a coincidence, which I can totally agree with. Maybe it was just nothing. But looking back, all these creepy occurrences couldn't have been just a coincidence. Especially that face. I remembered all of her features so clearly. The wrinkles and the cold eyes. No way that was just a random shadow. I'm wondering if anyone else has experienced creepy things while being at the Winchester house.
This took place a while ago. I was 13 and my family had just moved into a new town. A new friend of mine from school and I made plans to go trick-or-treating together. At the time I was thinking I was a bit too old to still be trick-or-treating, but who doesn't want free candy? My friend and I figured we still had 1 year of trick-or-treating left in us. Because we were 13 and lived in a fairly safe neighborhood, my parents thought it would be fine for us to go trick-or-treating together, without adult supervision. Everything was going great and we were having fun, getting some solid candy, etc. Then we rang one guy's doorbell. The porch light was on, and there was a pumpkin or two, so we figured the people in the house were likely to be handing out candy. A middle-aged man opened the door. At first I was glad because he was dressed in a costume and happy to see my friend and me. I felt we were in for some top-tier candy. I don't even remember what candy he handed out, but I do remember what happened next. He asked us to enter his home, which was weird, but we were 13, so we didn't really think anything of it. Then he asked us if he could take our photo. He said he always liked to take photos of kids every Halloween because he loved seeing the costumes. On one of his walls were a bunch of pictures of different random, unrelated children in Halloween costumes. At this point, even being a dumb 13-year-old, I was starting to get kind of creeped out. But I figured it was best not to upset the man and let him take the pictures so that we could just leave. So he snaps the photo of us, and then he pulls out a clipboard and a sheet of paper with a bunch of names written in childish handwriting. He says he likes the kids whose pics he snaps to sign their names so he can know who they are. At this point, we were both mega creeped out. We should have just ran away, but we were too conditioned not to be rude. I decided to sign a fake name. He looked at the paper, looked back up at me, then down to the paper, then repeated the fake name I'd given him, and then he nodded. Luckily after that, he didn't do anything and we were free to leave, but it definitely creeped us both out. At the time I thought it was just an eccentric guy, but as an adult looking back on the story, it seems much more sinister. I'm so glad nothing happened to us, and hope nothing bad happened to any other kids. Halloween, with all these costumed kids trick-or-treating in the dark and minimal parent supervision, could be a great opportunity for predators to get kids alone in their homes without anyone knowing the kids' whereabouts. Please stay safe out there, and happy Halloween.
This happened about 13 years ago when I was a sophomore in college, attending a liberal arts school in Suffolk County, New York. Within the first month or two of freshman year, I had found myself in a very tight-knit group of fellow theater geeks, 6 guys, including myself, and 1 girl, and they all loved horror movies and ghost stories. I had found my crew. Freshman year was tough, but we all held each other up and made the whole experience more enjoyable for one another. At the beginning of sophomore year, we decided that in October, as the Halloween season was ramping up, we would find a creepy wooded spot in a nearby town some night and scare the crap out of ourselves. We did some research and found that there was a particularly isolated area about 30 minutes away, infamous for paranormal sightings. It's perfect. The 7 of us split into 2 different cars and headed out into the night. Allow me to set the scene. You turn off a busy main road, flooded with strip malls and restaurants and whatnot, and you're almost immediately greeted by complete darkness. Again, this area was very heavily wooded. It was essentially a large web of winding roads surrounded by trees. Very few streetlights and very few houses. Without a GPS or a good sense of direction, one could easily get lost in there. We all made sure to have fully charged phones and flashlights, just in case, but the goal was to keep driving until we collectively decided to pull over and go exploring. So, per the directions, we made a left off of the main road, driving for about 30 minutes or so into this dark network, picking directions at random, just getting lost intentionally. Our cars made a turn, and to our surprise, there was a huge log in front of us. We had reached a dead end of some kind, with nothing but trees beyond it. We all got out to see exactly what this was. We stepped over the log and noticed 2 narrow trails leading in different directions. This seemed like as good of a time as any to grab our flashlights and do some amateur ghost hunting. We flipped a coin and set off on the trail to the right. The trail was so narrow that we had to walk single file to avoid getting whacked by the branches. For whatever reason, I ended up in the back. I'm usually pretty rational and level-headed, but I have to say, the further we went in, the more I was overcome with an uneasy feeling. I kept hearing sounds deep in the woods, unable to shake the feeling that we were being watched. But I seemed to be the only one who heard these things, so I shrugged it off as just my imagination. And in any case, the whole point of us being there was to get scared. Not to mention the fact that we were 7 able-bodied college students. What could we come across that could take us down? We headed down this trail for about 20 minutes, and just when I thought it would never end, we came to a massive clearing, and I mean massive. It was a large, open field of unkempt grass, comparable in scope to a golf course, but not nearly as well manicured. Trees surrounded the entire field, which was so large we couldn't see the end of it from where we were standing. I was thrilled to get out of that narrow trail, but I don't think any of us were expecting to find an area so vast. One of us looked to the right and said, "Hey, check that out." We all turned, and there was an old, dilapidated house several hundred yards away. The house was completely dark, with no cars or signs of anyone actually living there. We walked over and shined our flashlights at it, and sure enough, the windows and doors were all boarded up. I managed to peer between the boards on one of the windows, and what I could see was an old white couch covered in plastic, but an otherwise empty room. Whoever used to live here, they were long gone. Because there was no way in, and because we all felt sufficiently creeped out by the house anyway, we decided to walk closer to the trail that we had come in from, have a seat in the field, and figure out where to go next. We walked towards the narrow trail, but before we could sit, my friend Mark stopped what he was doing. His expression dropped, and he just pointed. We all turned, and on a very far side of the field, directly across from where we had come in, we could see someone tall, lanky, and pale dancing among the trees. And by dancing, I mean it was skipping around, grabbing a tree, swinging around it, and then doing the same to another tree. Basically a do-si-do. The moon was so bright and the woods so dark, it actually took a second for us to really understand what we were looking at. Jay, the 6'4" skeptic of the group, wasn't seeing it. I leaned into him, and I pointed in that direction, and I said, "Jay, look where I'm pointing. Don't you see this?" He squinted a bit, and the second he saw it, he gasped with everything that he had. He clutched my arm and whispered, "What in the world is that?" What happened next sent shock waves through all of us. Whoever this was, they stopped dancing. They looked in our direction and started charging straight at us. Without even thinking, we freaked and ran back to the trail. Yet again, Jay was the only one who didn't see what was happening. He shouted after us, "Guys, what is it? Where are you going?" After about 15 seconds of running like hell, I heard Jay scream, "Holy crap!" I looked back and I saw his flashlight following the rest of us into the trail. While the walk into the woods took about 20 minutes, we made it back to our 2 cars, hopped in, and were peeling away in less than 5. Once we were a safe distance away, we pulled over, got out, and checked in with each other about what had just happened. My heart was pounding, and I knew everyone else was feeling the same way. Nearly 15 years later, we're all still friends, living in different states, yet keeping in touch through marriages, divorces, children. You get it. But occasionally, out of the blue, one of us will send a group text to the others with something to the effect of, "The woods. That had really happened, right?" Well, it most certainly did. That experience is always in the back of my mind, and I'm pretty sure it always will be. Here's the thing that still resonates with me about that night. Whoever that was, they were dancing maniacally in the woods at 1 in the morning, and then ran directly for a group of young adults, not at all fazed by the fact that they were severely outnumbered. Did he know we were there from the second we parked? Was he the sound that I kept hearing when we walked the trail? Whatever the case may be, when he came for us that night, you can be sure none of us wanted to stick around and see what he was truly capable of.
This happened over a decade ago, but I only recently found this sub and I think it's a good fit. It was Halloween of 2008. I was in college and still in a relationship with my first serious boyfriend. We'd been together since high school, and it took this night to show me our relationship was abusive. It took one more incident before I finally left him for good. He was wonderful when sober, a little intense and controlling, but when he was drunk, I learned he was truly terrifying. This was the first incident that truly scared me. He joined in a stupid game called Gatorade and Shine Challenge. They would empty a bottle of Gatorade, at least halfway, then fill up the rest with moonshine. The goal was to finish the bottle within an hour, and then tell them crazy stories. Well, he completed the challenge, but he never did tell his friends the story. He couldn't remember most of it, and it painted him in a horrific light. I knew things were heading downhill when he started calling me a slut after saying hi to a guy friend at the party we were at. I decided we better head home before he got any worse. I thought I could nip it in the bud, manage it. We get home and change out of our costumes. James wanted to have sex, but in his state and after what he'd called me, I wasn't interested. Oddly enough, it led him to calling me a whore. I left the apartment to go smoke. Our neighbors were having a party and 2 guys were outside smoking as well. They came over to see if I was okay. I'd been crying and they'd heard the yelling. I said I was okay, which they could obviously see was a lie. They let me know that if I needed help, they'd help me. James chose that moment to come outside. He said he'd heard us and told them to get away from me while walking towards them. I stood up to get in between them. They told me they'd meant what they said and to not forget it. They told him to watch himself. I was facing them to say bye and thanks for the offer when one of the guys gasped, staring at my boyfriend in shock. I turned around and my eyes immediately caught the ground. Just as what I was seeing registered, the other guy lunged forward and grabbed me, pulling me behind him. What was on the ground that elicited such reactions, you ask? Blood. Blood was dripping on the ground from his hand. He was holding a knife so tightly He'd sliced his own hand open. I begged him to drop it, which he only agreed to when I walked back towards him. I was an idiot, I know. The two guys seemed at loss, and I felt so bad for them having their Halloween ruined by this scary, crazy bullshit. They left me to it after I swore I'd be fine, reiterating that I could come to them for help. We got inside, and I immediately started hiding all the sharp objects. I called James' roommates, begging them to come home. He started screaming to give him the knives back, how I was a slut, and if I wouldn't fuck him, what use was I? I called my parents and left, then called his mom because I was scared he'd hurt himself. She let me know how he was my problem now. I should have called the police, but I didn't want to ruin his life. I'm ashamed to say I got back together with him for 6 more months of hell after that. But today, I can safely say, James, let's not meet, ever again.
Halloween of '01. From the title, you know this happened in 2001 on Halloween. Halloween night to be specific. I was 7. If you want to know my current age, do the math. My mom helped me remember this one, so if there are any further questions, I will ask her as she remembers the night vividly. It was freezing, probably within the 20 to 30 degree range. I was hell-bent on going out anyway. I wanted my pillowcase to be stocked full of sweets, damn it. I dressed as a cat, not too hard to imagine. Now, at the time, I had zero idea, but my rock star of a mom was on it, and you can thank her for her on-par memory. My mom noticed a very tall man dressed in all black. Mom said he had on black jeans, black trench coat, and a black hockey mask. He had no kids with him, so that was a huge red flag to my mom, but he did have a pumpkin basket to put candy in. Reference this. He followed us around, house to house, always stayed back 3 or 4 houses according to Mom. After 20 minutes or so, she shrugged it off, thinking this was just some really tall kid just innocently out trick-or-treating. But the more she said she kept shrugging it off, the more uneasy she felt. Now, I do remember my pillowcase was only half full, and my mom hurrying us home and being super pouty about it. I do not, however, remember Mom putting the house in lockdown after we got in the front door, but she remembers and says she did it very quickly. I ate some candy, brushed my teeth, and got into bed. Mom laid down next to me. I remember this and thought it was a little weird since I was sleeping on my own at 7. Now, this is where my mom really helped me out with the story, as I had no idea until we talked about it earlier. Fast forward to the morning. There was a pumpkin basket full of candy with a note on top that said, "Meow," in chicken scratch on our front porch right outside the front door. My mom threw out the candy in case it was tampered with, and she burned up the note. Now, what creeps me out, and I just found out from my mom earlier, is that in the middle of the night, she got up from my bed to recheck the house, looked out the window, and saw him in our front lawn staring at the house with the pumpkin basket in hand. She didn't think he noticed her. She called the police immediately. She briefed the officer on what happened. The officer said he'd do a few rounds and patrol the area. My mom never heard back from the officer that night, or ever, she said. Mom also told me she stayed up the entire night with a pistol in her lap after seeing him in the front yard. Since that night, and up until now, nothing weird with him has happened since.
One Halloween Eve. It was about 2006, and one night before Halloween. My family was having a huge party that night, and the house was, I kid you not, littered with drunk adults in costumes. But that's not where the creepiness lies. The creepiness happened outside the house, within the dark shadows of my neighborhood. It was late, and everyone was partying. Except for, of course, my older sister and I. My sister had some friends over, and we were all goofing around online, Remember Omegle? Yep, that's where we spend most of our time. Bored of being dumb online, we all decided to venture down the block to the nearest 7-Eleven for some ice cream and soda, which we'd run out of at the house. Being conniving, we got our drunk family to allow us to walk down the street. For many reasons, that wasn't a good idea. We were all dressed up in our costumes, laughing our way down the blackened streets. It was completely dark and empty out, save for the shine of the moon. A few minutes into our walk, we noticed the street in front of us being lit up by beams of headlights. A car was approaching, and it was approaching really slowly. We giggled it off, joking it was a creep. Why joke about something true, though? Suddenly the car had made a sharp turn. It was coming straight for us. Our widened eyes lit up the high beams. We all took off running. Without thinking twice, we went as fast as we could and dove into some nearby bushes, trying hard to quiet our breathing. Through the bushes, we could see the slow approaching lights of the car again. This time, we heard male voices coming from inside the vehicle, whose windows were rolled down. Where the hell did they go? They were right there. Turn around, idiot, keep looking. The car turned around, slowly creeping its way back down the street. We stayed hiding for what felt like forever before finally deciding to run back home, ditching the ice cream and soda plan. Miraculously, we all made it home in one piece, and booked it back downstairs to the den, far away from any cars. They were probably just a group of guys trying to spook some kids, but the fact we could have been abducted that Halloween Eve still stirs in me. I feel like the luckiest dumb kid ever, and I thought Omegle was scary.
This happened when I was around the age of 12 on Halloween night. My friend and I were off to go egging. The two of us hit a few houses and got that evil neighbor of mine. Lucky for us, she left her patio door open. Egged straight into the kitchen. As the night continued on, more and more trick-or-treaters were disappearing from the streets. It was getting late and pretty dark. At this point, I'm ready to go home, but my friend insists that we go meet up with a buddy of his and continue on with the Halloween festivities. So I agree to go with him, although I had a bad feeling in the pit of my stomach, but stupidly, I agreed. We begin our roughly 2-block hike to his friend's house. The streetlights are on, but they're pretty far apart and some are pretty dim. So there are some pretty dark patches of the street, dark enough to where anyone could be hiding and you wouldn't have the slightest clue. As we're walking through one of these dark patches, there just so happens to be an alley on our left side and the street to our right. By this time, no one is on the streets but us and a few straggler trick-or-treaters calling it for the night. We make it about halfway to his friend's house when I hear the screech of an old beat-up pickup truck as its brakes engage on the street right next to us. We both freeze. My stomach dropped along with his, being stuck open in disbelief. Two men, both wearing black ski masks and dark clothing, step out of the old rusted beat-to-hell Ford truck and begin to walk towards us with purpose. The driver, with a big smile on his face, looks me dead in the eye and says, "What's up, fellas?" His voice was scratchy and sounded to be in the mid-30s. I can't think of anything else to compare it to. I continue to stand there in complete shock. My friend grabs my arm and it shakes me out of it, and we book it. We make a left on the next street and start pounding on a few doors. No one answers. By now, we're both frantically trying to find a way to ditch these guys. We only make it a few houses down before they come roaring down the street in their truck. We ended up spotting a house on the street with their porch light on, which is the intergalactic rule on Halloween for yes, we have candy still, meaning hopefully someone was still awake in that house and willing to answer the door. Running down the street, all while those masked men are still speeding towards us. As soon as we step onto the other side of the street, they blew by us. They were actually going to try and hit us. We make it up to the house and pound and kick on the door until a woman answers. We explain what just happened. She grabs the phone for us, and my friend calls his dad to come get us. While he's on the phone, I'm looking up and down the street. No creep, no truck. Not a single person. While I'm still scanning, the woman who potentially just saved our lives tells me her husband is a cop. She called him and let him know. At the time, that was the best news I'd heard in my entire young life. A few minutes go by. My friend's dad comes and picks us up. He drops me off at home, and I tell my parents what happened. My parents called the police as well. They come to my house not long after and ask me a few questions. Unfortunately, me being young and still terrified, I really wasn't much help. After that night, I never heard from the police about them being caught, and I never saw that truck again. Looking back, from the point of the men approaching us up until we ran past the woman's house was only about 3 minutes. It felt like hours. So yeah, creepy old guys and a creepy old truck. Let's not meet again. Hey everyone, thanks for sticking around if you stuck around to this point. If you haven't yet, please hit the like button, the subscribe button, and that notification bell to be notified when future episodes come out. If you have a true scary story of your own, feel free to send it to my email or post it to my subreddit. You can stalk me on Twitter, you can stalk me on Facebook, and you can also stalk me on Instagram. All these links are below. Hey everybody, if you're listening to my voice, then you know it is Halloween. Unfortunately and fortunately, the best holiday of the year, but it's gonna come to an end after today. It's been an incredible month. I didn't get as much done as I wanted to, but it's been a big month, a great month, an awesome month, another Halloween, another successful Halloween, I'd say. Huge shout out and huge thank you to every single one of the narrators that came on and read a story for you and to shove into your ear canals. Thank you guys. I hope every single one of you has an awesome and a happy Halloween. Enjoy it with yourself, enjoy it with your family, enjoy it with your friends. Stay safe, and I look forward to the next one, and I'll see you in the next one. You got something to say, bud? Come on, let them know, come on.
Happy Halloween. There you go.